Hi, everybody. Jeremy Plonk from First Bet and Express Bet with the It's Official podcast. Each week, we take on 5 hot topics in horse racing. And now that Kentucky Derby 151 has cooled a bit, we still have plenty of heat on the stove to get after. We'll talk about the race itself, the fallout, the Preakness coming up next, an incredible undercard, all part of today's program. It was a Kentucky Derby that finally made a little bit of sense. We expect some chaos on the first Saturday in May. In fact, we not only anticipate it, but we welcome it. But this year, the Derby, it made a lot of sense. That's our first topic this week on It's Official. Just the common sense finish that we saw in this year's Kentucky Derby. The pace set up the way that you thought. The top preps kind of played out the way you thought. And in the end, it was the third choice over the favorite and probably the 2 best horses in the race coming in who put on their best display.
So the pace is honest enough, set by the Baffert runners, Citizen Bull, and Neo Equos is pressing it on the outside. American Promise together with Owen Almighty, 3rd and 4th. Break of another 2.5 to East Avenue in 5th. Burnham Square is 6th on the inside. Brian Hernandez has him down on the rail like he did with Mystic Dan last year. They're about 6 lengths off the lead as they race for the far turn. Citizen Bull on the inside, Neo Equos on the outside. These two right together on the lead. American Promise comes under pressure. Owen Almighty is 4th by 2.5. Chunk of Gold is 5th, trying to get involved now with 5 lengths to make up. In the meanwhile, we look back for journalism. He's been swung to the outside by Umberto Rispoli, and he's picking off horses one by one on the far outside. Neo Equos is the leader at the top of the stretch. Journalism is on the move as they turn for home, and Sovereignty is coming with him on the outside. The two of them go right by with a furlong to run. Journalism and Sovereignty, nose to nose, down to the last 16th of a mile. Sovereignty has taken the lead. Journalism is second toward the inside. Baeza is 3rd, but it will be Sovereignty to rule the Kentucky Derby. Journalism and Baeza were next. Final Gambit was 4th. The final time was 2:02.31 seconds.
When you looked at the finishes of the races in the prep season this year, the Fountain of Youth finish by Sovereignty was a major standout. The San Felipe finish and the Santa Anita Derby finish by Journalism were the 2 big standouts. So it lent no surprise that those 2 were the 2 slugging it out through the stretch at Churchill Downs. 1,234.5 feet, an easy one to remember, 1,234.5 feet. And it was an exciting stretch run, but I was a little disappointed in that Journalism didn't dig in a bit more. With those huge, brisk, late pace figures that he had shown in his previous races, I expected him to dig in and give a little bit more game fight into the final 100 yards of the Kentucky Derby, but it was all about Sovereignty in the finish. This was the first time in his career, though, that Journalism had a horse come up to his outside. He had swept up on the outside in all 4 of his previous victories in succession, so maybe it was a little bit of different feel for him. He felt the left-hand stick and didn't respond to it because he had the rival to his outside. A little bit different situation than he was used to, and he didn't finish with the same kind of flair that we've seen in some of his other races. Maybe the mud, maybe the 1.25 miles. All these things are factors when we look at this year's Kentucky Derby. But 4 of the top 6 betting choices rounded out the Superfecta. This was a Derby that was absolutely trustworthy to the public and ran to it. The Superfecta paid $1,682 for $1, just a pittance compared to what we see some years. The Trifecta, very formful, $230 for the dollar Trifecta, with Baeza coming on to run a good 3rd. For Baeza, a horse who just got in off the also eligible list and had one of the far outside posts, the far outside post in post 19, he ran a much more professional race than he did in the Santa Anita Derby, and he looks to be one who's really, really moving forward. So top 3, a lot of plaudits to them. 4th place finisher in the Kentucky Derby, Final Gambit, came from dead ass last as we thought. He got in a lot of trouble at the start, which we'll go back and take a look at the replay in just a minute of the start and take you through the race with my commentary a bit. But for Final Gambit to rally and finish 4th, that solidified the optics that we saw for sure in how well he closed at Turfway Park on the synthetic. He certainly did not diminish his performance at all in finishing 4th in there. some disappointment. Sandman, the second wagering choice, part of that, of course, something we'll talk about with some social media influence in just a moment. But a disappointing 7th out of Sandman. Burnham Square got in some traffic trouble. He ended up 6th in there. We'll talk about his trip in just a minute. But the big disappointment for me, especially, was Luxor Cafe from Japan. He got banged around at the beginning. We'll see that in the replay when he got kind of tangled up with the favorite Journalism under the wire the first time. And Luxor Cafe finishing 12th, a bad performance for the Japanese, 12th, and then Admire Daytona just stopped and brought up the rear of the pack. Neither one of those horses moved forward the narrative that the Japanese are getting closer after missing last year by just 2 noses in the Kentucky Derby with Forever Young. 3rd and 5th last year for Japan, 12th and 19th this year. Obviously, not the same kind of results, whether that was track condition, whether that was the quality of the horses that came over this year. That's something probably we'll find out later in the year. Maybe we see those Japanese horses back come Breeders' Cup time, and maybe we'll get to see them against some of the top horses in the world and see how they might stack up on a fast track. But certainly the Japanese horses, the big disappointment in Kentucky Derby 151. Now, let's review the race a little bit from the start. We'll go with no sound here. We're going to pick up the first quarter of a mile through the wire the first time and then pick the race back up on the backstretch. Want you to notice here with the Derby replay, keep an eye on the first 5, 6 post positions, and then also watch for the 8 and the 7 in here. So really the inside part of the gate. We know the winner Sovereignty is going to come from the outside here. He'll be in stall, 17, I believe it was at post time, or 16. But what we're looking at here really from 8 in is what you want to focus in on here on the starting gate, because really we're going to see the one take a right-hand turn coming out of the starting gate there. We've seen this before with Martin Garcia, the jockey. He did it with Byron in the 2014 Breeders' Cup. Dirty pool, if you want to look at it that way. Aggressive riding if you're in his camp. But either way you look at it, he and Neo Equus are way out in the middle of the track, caused a big chain reaction. And right now down on the inside, Journalism and Luxor Cafe, they got into their tangle. And really that kind of put Luxor Cafe farther back than you would expect. As we pick it up on the backstretch here, this is exactly the pace scenario anybody who kind of had a racing form was thinking could happen. Citizen Bull, Neo Equus, American Promise, horses drawn to the inside. East Avenue had speed. We knew Owen Almighty from the 20 had speed. Those are the first 5 horses down the backstretch. Everything is shaking out the way you would think. Burnham Square is in a beautiful position right now on the inside under Brian Hernandez. He's leading that second pack right now with space in front of him, and he's going to have one horse get in his way, and that's enough for him not to be able to pull this thing off in the Kentucky Derby. I thought Burnham Square, the talk about him having such a rough trip, I think is a bit overblown. I don't think he finishes any better than 5th in this race. Maybe he beats Final Gambit for 4th. But when we pick this up on the outside, the first run from Journalism, the second run here on the outside from Sovereignty, and now you see the left-hand stick right there from the jockey on Journalism, Umberto Rispoli. He didn't have to go left-handed at all in his previous races. He was swooping up on the outside of horses and went by them. I don't think the horse really responded to it all that well, and I thought he would have a little bit more to give. Baeza, of course, gallops out really well in this particular spot. Journalism galloped out fine. I thought that this is a race where maybe if you flip where they are on the racetrack, if Journalism comes to the outside of Sovereignty and Sovereignty is on the inside of Journalism, maybe it's a little different outcome, but we don't know that, and that's, part of the run of the race. But getting first run and being a little bit more forwardly placed for Journalism, I think was an advantage that Sovereignty didn't have. So where you think one might have had an edge, another had an edge in another area, and the best horse just won in Kentucky Derby 51 on this particular day. Maybe we'll see him in a rematch again sometime soon. But if we don't, we know we got the top 2 horses in the crop ran 1-2 in that race. Betting wise, again, we saw that Sandman was the second choice in the wagering in the win pool, but a lot of that was impacted by what we would call more casual money in the win pool. When you looked at the exotics intra race and the fact that the exacta only paid $24, upsetting the favorite on top, that tells you right there that this third choice in the wagering in the win pool was really a clear-cut second choice in all of the betting. So top 2 horses ran their race in Kentucky Derby 51, a 151, and this is a race that made a lot of sense. Now, the race also made a lot of money. I'm talking serious money, and that's where we get to topic number 2 this week. Business boomed at the Kentucky Derby, and we'll ask ourselves why. Well, Kentucky Derby had a record-setting handle not only for the Derby race, the Derby day, but the whole week at Churchill Downs. You look at the 2025 totals. Last year, 2024 set the all-time record in all three of these categories. Derby race handle up $24 million over the previous record. I mean, that's more than a 10% gain over the previous record. Almost the same story in Derby Day overall handle. That was up 30 million almost on 320 million previously, now up to 349. And Derby week, 473 million. That was also up about $30 million, or $27 million over the course of the previous best Derby week. That's up about 5-6% over the previous high. Fantastic numbers. Business was brisk. There were good field sizes on Kentucky Derby Day, no doubt. Oaks Day struggled a little bit with the field sizes. So when you see those Derby week numbers, really impressive considering how many of the Oaks Day races seem to be kind of one-shot deals with big, heavy favorites and fields on the smaller side of things. NBC Sports saw 17.7 million viewers. That was the most to watch the Kentucky Derby since 1989. So business was absolutely brisk when we talk about the Kentucky Derby. And for all the troubles that we have in the industry, and I am by no means a sunshine pumper, we've got big problems in the betting and the gambling side of things and the everyday racing and horse racing. We're aware of that. We know that. But the Kentucky Derby itself is alive and well. Not all the Triple Crown races can say the same thing. Not all the racetracks in America can say the same thing. And Churchill Downs itself on the non-Kentucky Derby days obviously has a vast amount of improvement that it can make in its product and its results. But when you talk about Kentucky Derby Day, it is absolutely strong. We live in a society that lives on social media, that lives for big events, that piles on. It's a piling on society where likes, clicks, volume. It's a volume society with everything we do. So the popular is more popular than ever. And the things that get lost more than ever in a jungle of just so much information and content that can be consumed out there. So when you get hot in this kind of environment, like the Kentucky Derby has been in recent years, it can really pile on. And there's no question that's part of what's happening right now. Look at some of the factors that led to this year's Kentucky Derby with the record handle and the big television numbers. I think big parts of this, Toby Keith with Render Judgment in the race. There was a lot of talk, national media, a lot of folks in the sports world, in the country music world, really heavily backing Render Judgment. The fact that Render Judgment in the Kentucky Derby, a horse who probably should have been 75, 80 to 1, was 20 to 1, and for much of the betting was 13, 14, 15 to 1. Tells you that there was a lot of interest in Toby Keith's horse, posthumously getting him to the Kentucky Derby. Render Judgment did not deliver on that excitement, of course, finishing 17th of 19. Also note, as the headline tells you at the bottom, it was a record wagering day in 2024 for the Kentucky Derby. So this year's success did not come out of the blue. The Derby has been trending upright. So this year's success and other things that happened and led to the success of the 2025 Derby, this was already on a positive arc. So there are some, victory laps being taken right now by individuals, organizations, people who kind of think they're in the know in the marketing world. But this event was going the right direction last year with the all-time record. So it continued on that upward flight. You had the Netflix series Race for the Crown that debuted in late April that showed you kind of the behind the scenes and the people involved in thoroughbred racing and a lot of the folks who were involved in the 2024 Triple Crown run. That certainly did not hurt. One of the top 10 views on Netflix for several weeks in the weeks leading up to the Kentucky Derby. That didn't hurt. Then you have the influencer Griffin Johnson. No question that he's involved with America's Best Racing and the program to share ownership in a Kentucky Derby contender like Sandman, and the amount of work and the amount of views that he did on social media between TikTok, X, and all the various channels, just tremendous. I mean, here's his TikTok numbers: 9.7 million followers and $609 million likes to his content. That's just on TikTok. So that young man did a lot of work in promoting Sandman, the horse. ABR can certainly take some credit for being involved in that with the Jockey Club and getting, Terry Finley and the West Point Thoroughbreds Group and all the different people who own shares of Sandman to get Griffin Johnson involved. No question, this all has some kind of impact on the race day numbers. I would say as much impact on that TV number of 17.7 million As for the gambling and the betting side of things, I think that's more up for debate. How much things like Race for the Crown and a social media influencer impact the handle, I think that's more longer range and more difficult to assess. But certainly, I think the TV number, the largest audience to watch the Kentucky Derby since 1989, I think you got to look at those factors. You have to look at Toby Keith's influence, the appearances people made on Toby's behalf, like Kenny McPeak on Fox News Channel, some other, big-time interviews nationally. I know personally, I spent a good part of my young adult life in Oklahoma and have a lot of friends still there and family, and I got texts galore like, Toby's got a horse, Toby's got a horse, Toby's got a horse. Bob Stoops, the former coach of the Oklahoma Sooners, the Hall of Famer, tweeting out that he's rooting for Render Judgment. There was a whole swell of people in a different community that really don't look and follow the Kentucky Derby that were into it. They certainly would not have that kind of impact on the tote board, but they would certainly have a big impact on the number of eyeballs watching the Kentucky Derby. So I think a lot of that influence, the biggest TV audience, I think we can credit to some of those things that we're talking about with Griffin Johnson, the social media influencer. As for the handle, like we said, it was already a record handle last year. We're trending right. The economy's getting a little bit better, things like that. There can be various factors why the handle for the Kentucky Derby was so much better this year. Maybe a better field, more trustworthy favorites. It's hard to say, when you talk about the undercards and the races building up to it too, because that Kentucky Derby Day handle and Kentucky Derby Week handle certainly are part of the overall number, not just the Run for the Roses race. But all three factors, Derby race, Derby Day, Derby Week, we're all up and up at record levels. That's good news. How do we build on it, and how do we, move forward from it? Well, you'd like to have a big bounce into the Preakness Stakes, but as we get to topic number 3, as announced today, Sovereignty, the Kentucky Derby winner, will not run in the Preakness. It's the Preakness. He's not heading to Baltimore. The Kentucky Derby winner skips this race. We saw it happen with Country House in 2019, also trained by Bill Mott, and we saw it from Rich Strike in 2022 off of his upset win. So this is the third Derby winner since 2019 to diss the Preakness. And look, this just didn't happen in the past. You go back to Spendebuck in 1985, skipping it because there was a big purse incentive to run in the Jersey Derby. His connections were New Jersey and Cam Gambelotti and company. They sent their horse to the Jersey Derby at Garden State Park and ran for big money with Spendebuck. That was a different situation. There's nobody throwing money somewhere else to lure horses away from the Triple Crown here. They're opting not to run. And there are 3 of them who have opted not to run, of course, the Kentucky Derby winners. But we're not getting a lot of the horses from the Kentucky Derby. It wasn't very long ago that 3, 4, 5, 6 horses were very commonplace coming out of the Derby to run back in the Preakness. It was never 9, 10, 11, 12. The only times we ever had big turnout from Derby horses, and I studied this when I did the research with NBC back in my 18 years working with the Triple Crown telecast from 2000 to 2017. When I worked on the Triple Crown telecast, we looked at that. What was the drop-off from the Derby to the Preakness? It was always based on who won the Derby. If a big favorite won the Kentucky Derby and a tough horse, you had a small number of horses from the Derby come back to the Preakness because they didn't think they could beat him. In the years where you had a Giacomo or a big upset horse, Mind That Bird, win the Kentucky Derby, then everybody came to the Preakness because it looked like open season, right? We're not trusting a 50-1 shot to win back-to-back, so everybody came out to it. Now it seems that things have changed since 2019 because prior to that, it wasn't the situation that we're dealing with now. So it's really a last 5 years issue for the Preakness Stakes. And this announcement obviously is disappointing. We've had new shooters, horses who did not run in the Kentucky Derby, win the Preakness the last 5 years in a row. It's an unbelievable stat when you think about Aloma's Ruler in 1982 or 82, 83. 82 for Aloma's Ruler, and all the way to Red Bullet in 2000 until we had another new shooter win it. And then Red Bullet was all the way until this recent run, from 2000 to this recent run of the last 5 years. So from like 1982 to this last run, there was exactly one horse win the Preakness Stakes who wasn't part of the Kentucky Derby. This is a sea change in the way that horses are being treated, and that is a double entendre, if you will, with treated. I mean, it's talking about not only the treatment of them in terms of the care and planning for those horses, but also the medicinal treatment of the horses. I mean, we're in an era now where I think it's safe to say that a large percentage of horses are receiving recovery medications after running in races, and it's legal to do so. They're not receiving illegal medications, but things like NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and joint injections are more commonplace after races and maybe just more known after races than maybe they were in past history. But those things must clear a horse's system in order to be able to run back again. And if you've got to treat your horse in recovery after running in the Kentucky Derby, it may or may not, depending on how much treatment you have to give, may not clear the system. Certainly wouldn't clear the system, with some of that stuff in 2 weeks' time. A lot of times the withdrawal times and for a medication to clear a horse's system with a lot of these different meds are upwards of 4 weeks. And that's why you see everybody talk about, we want 5 weeks between races. We want 5 weeks between races. It allows the post-race recovery medications to completely flush the system and run back. We can talk about how it used to be, and I can't tell you the honest answer to that. Did this stuff happen in the used to be era and it just wasn't checked for or wasn't detected and it was just kind of the way of the world? Are we a little more sensitive to that now? And now we need to, make sure that this doesn't happen and horses can't recover on hay, oats, and water. You might think, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. But then tell me, how did Seize the Gray go from Kentucky Derby Day last year in the Pat Day Mile and come right back and win this race? Trainers like Graham Motion, an absolute hay, oats, and water trainer in anybody's estimation. And I'm not saying Bill Mott isn't, but I'm saying if you said which trainer in America is hay, oats, and water, I think Graham Motion would come up as quick as anybody. He came right back with Animal Kingdom and ran in the Preakness and ran a banger of a race. Then he came right back with Animal Kingdom after winning the Derby, running well in the Preakness, and right back to the Belmont. And then Animal Kingdom will go on and become an excellent racehorse. Breeders' Cup Mile, Dubai World Cup, it didn't hurt his career with a hay, oats, and water guy. So what's going on where horses can't run back on 2 weeks? I think it's a real discussion we have to have. I don't have the answer right now in this podcast, obviously, and I'm not in the veterinary records of each of these individual horses, but I'm posing the question out there to the people who are. What are we doing after races, and how are we getting horses ready for the next race? And is that why we can't get a horse to run back on 2 weeks? I'd like to know the answer to it. Hopefully, somewhere along the line, we can find out from that. Bill Mott is not averse to running a horse back on 2 weeks. I'm not saying he's averse to running a Kentucky Derby winner back in the Preakness. He doesn't do that typically. Obviously, he hasn't over the years, and he didn't with Country House. Now, Country House fell ill and never raced again, obviously. So, the situation with Country House, though, if you dial back to 2019, Google's a great thing. Dial back to Country House skips Preakness stakes in 2019. And there was a lot of talk back then that Mott didn't want to go from the very get-go, and they wanted to try to find a reason why not to run in the Preakness stakes. So, look, we can, think that this is a brand new problem, and we can also look at some of the people who are involved in the decisions that are being made. We never saw Rich Strike get back to the form that he was in the Kentucky Derby, right? I mean, he just never got anywhere near that Kentucky Derby race. So when we're talking about the horses who have skipped the Kentucky Derby from this point forward, Country House never ran again and fell ill. Just an unfortunate situation there. Rich Strike never got anywhere back to the form that he had shown in the Kentucky Derby. As for Sovereignty, we will see where he ends up next. They say the Belmont Stakes is where they will go to Saratoga in another 3 weeks rest. So 5 weeks between, obviously, the Derby and the Belmont Stakes. A lot of people have taken that Derby to Belmont move because they want to try to have the fresh horse at the end of the series to upend those who came across. But if that's just going to become the natural leap that you must go from Derby to Belmont, it's not good for horse racing. I mean, we're talking about all this momentum, right? I mean, if Griffin Johnson's going to get all these people excited for the Triple Crown, and we're going to space these races out a month apart, 2 months apart, the whole idea of marketing is capitalizing when you're hot, trying to extend this out. And if they can't keep horses healthy over a short time frame, how in the world is keeping a horse healthy over 2, 3, 4 months in a Triple Crown going to be any better? How often do we see the good horses from the Triple Crown in the Breeders' Cup? You can't make that direct marketing play in many years. So I don't understand the thought process behind stretching out the Triple Crown to accommodate this situation, because it's not going to help the business part of it. Not going to help the business part of it at all. Who will it accommodate? The trainers who need more time between races. Somebody tell me why we need more time between the races than we used to. I mean, an honest answer. Whether it's medicinal, whether it's breeding and the horses are more fragile, somebody in the industry who's got a lot of money knows a pretty decent hint to what the answer is. I'd like to know what it might be. So that's the Preakness from Sovereignty. He will run at Naira apparently coming up, and that will be the race everybody wants to see then. As for the Preakness Stakes itself, we will find out what kind of field we end up with when that field is drawn a week from Monday. So it'll be drawn, or not a week from Monday, this coming Monday, which will be the week of the race of the Preakness Stakes. So they'll draw the field on Monday. The race runs, of course, a week from Saturday. But one final thing to this, like if you are okay with the Preakness not having the Derby winner and it not being an important part of the racing world, that you feel like nobody owes any commitment to the Preakness Stakes, but you're okay with the Belmont. Think back to what the Belmont Stakes was before it moved to Saratoga a couple years ago, and what the Belmont Stakes was in years where there was no Triple Crown on the line. Because if there's no Triple Crown on the line at Pimlico because they're skipping the Preakness, there will never be another Triple Crown on the line in the Belmont. And a Belmont Day without a Belmont on the line and not run at Saratoga in a big fair festival where everybody wants to go on vacation is a very ho-hum racing day on the calendar compared to a major event like a Triple Crown on the line at the Belmont. And the whole reason Belmont wants its own TV contract and break away from the others is so they can make the money when they get to a point where a Triple Crown is on the line for the Belmont Stakes. And they want their big share of the pie. It was the same after the Smarty Jones year they renegotiated. Now they're on Fox for the Triple Crown. And that's fine and dandy. But can the Belmont Stakes stand on its own without the first two races of the Triple Crown? I think it's a pompous opinion to think so because history says not so fast. It's a fabulous undercard. They have dressed the undercard up on Belmont Stakes Day in recent years. It's a much better day than it used to be, no question. When you stockpile all your stakes races on the undercard of Belmont Day, it's a much better racing day than it used to. But the Belmont Stakes, without a Triple Crown on the line, every year, is going to have to rebrand itself and rebuild itself as an event. If you think Pimlico's in trouble, Belmont won't be far behind it once they leave Saratoga. They'll have a great year the first year or two at Belmont Park with the new facility. Everybody will want to be there, see all the state of the art. But as soon as that becomes third year at Belmont, fourth year, if you're looking long-term, the long-term vision, and everybody wants to complain about, oh, Pimlico, this is short-sighted thinking, racing short-sighted. The long-term success of the Belmont Stakes without a Triple Crown ending in the Belmont Stakes is not a better prospect than where it has been. That's all I'll say and leave it to that. And as for Belmont and the people who are saying on social media that the decision is all about the horse, it's got to be about the horse. I get that. If this horse is healthy, though, there is a debt owed to racing and to the racing public, I think, to run your horse if they're healthy. Why? Belmont's career, $358 million in purse earnings. You know who paid those purse earnings? The vast majority. You, me, and everybody else who's ever bought a $2 ticket, right? Purses are paid almost exclusively through wagering handle. There are some state supplements, some breeder supplements, things like that go into the purse money. But the vast majority of the $358 million that Belmont's horses have made him a multimillionaire over the years was paid for by the racing public. So do you think you owe something back to the public to try to run a horse who's healthy? I think so. If the horse isn't healthy, I totally get it. If the horse could not pass a vet exam because of post-race medications that perhaps he needed, I have no idea in this situation, and I'm not suggesting that's it. I'm saying it's a plausible possibility because we don't have the real answer. The real answer is I just don't think it's right for the horse. That's, vague. And so when you're trying to nail down anything specific, that's one of the possibilities I think we need to look at. And whether we're talking about this horse, Sovereignty, or another horse who would be in a similar kind of situation, not wanting to run back in the Preakness, we're just railing on the Derby winner. What about the runner-up? What about the third place finisher? What about the fourth place finisher? What about the fifth place finisher? It's all part of the same question. Somebody explain why you can't run back on 2 weeks and why it's suddenly bad. Because, Mark Cassie's got Sandman. A couple years ago, on the same kind of bad trip and late running closer, War of Will, 2019, when he got sawed off by the horse who won the race, Maximum Security. He came back, wheeled back in the Preakness and won the darn thing. And War of Will went on to become a Grade 1 winner on turf later in his career. So running in the Derby, in a roughly run Derby, back in the Preakness, didn't hurt him. He won that, and he went on and became a top-flight Grade 1 winner on turf. So there are just so many examples of horses who have been perfectly fine doing this that I just get fired up and angry to hear about somebody trying to cherry pick one or two horses throughout time that they say, oh, well, running in these two races, that was too much. It's just kind of crazy talk. I mean, we talked about Owen Almighty all spring, where people said Owen Almighty's being overrun. This trainer's being overrun by the ownership group that have Derby fever. That horse is going to end up ruined in the Kentucky Derby. He led him to the 8th pole almost and ran in a really good 5th. So, sometimes the answers don't always come from the trainers. Not always do the answers come from the trainers. That's where we'll leave it. Sovereignty's Preakness. We are looking forward to the Preakness Stakes with whoever shows up there. I'm somebody who was born and raised about 40 minutes from Pimlico, just across the Pennsylvania line. It's a home track for me. I know my sponsor tag up here, presented by First Bet, involved with the Preakness Stakes and intimately involved. But my love for the Preakness Stakes dates back 30 years before I ever drew a paycheck from anybody in the horse racing industry or from this particular company, and 15, 20 years before I ever drew a check from anybody in the horse racing industry. So I love the Preakness Stakes. I'm looking forward to it and hope that it's a great field. Let's take a look at some of the possibilities who could be heading to the Preakness Stakes. Journalism, I think he might be in the mix for this, coming out the second in the Kentucky Derby without the favorite or without the expected favorite, Sovereignty, who would have been favored after the winning the Kentucky Derby. Without him there, Journalism is an odds-on favorite for the Preakness. And you think about the ownership of Journalism, there are a million owners of this horse. I mean, he and Rodriguez both have tremendously long ownership groups that are syndicates amongst the ownership group. So there are a lot of people who could be sold the experience of winning a Triple Crown race, and that matters when it comes to deciding whether or not you're going to run in the Kentucky Derby. Whereas Sovereignty, owned by Godolphin, the ruler of Dubai, he's got more money than anybody practically on the planet. So what does it matter to him whether or not, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum of Godolphin, what does it matter to him? Well, he's not trying to sell the experience like, say, Journalism, say, Rodriguez. They're ownership groups with a lot of syndicates and a lot of partners. There's something to be said for winning a Triple Crown race. Rodriguez and Journalism, to me, would be the two favorites likely in the Preakness under this potential scenario. American Promise for D. Wayne Lucas could wheel back out of the Derby, they say. Clever, again, is a serious racehorse for Steve Asmussen. He's a late bloomer, but if you watched him in his last couple starts at Oaklawn, he can flat out run. River Thames third in the Bluegrass for Todd Pletcher, who typically doesn't support this race in the Preakness. He's listed as a probable. If he shows up, it'll be a little bit of a surprise in that we don't see a lot of Pletchers here historically, but River Thames would certainly be a great get for the race. Gosger won the Lexington, Pay Billy won the Federico Tessio, and then Heart of Honor coming over from the UK, last race, second in the UAE Derby at Meydan in Dubai. A Heart of Honor. These are just some of the probables at this point and possibles. Other horses not listed here, Instant Replay. And then I think, Sandman and Burnham Square. I'm not saying no that those horses, their connections haven't said absolutely not yet. I'd be surprised if we see Burnham Square, but I think he would fit well in this race. I think he's probably better at the mile and 3/16 and keep going farther and farther. And as for Sandman, this is a situation, like we said, Mark Casse won this race with War of Will, similar, just everything very similar to War of Will. So Sandman would be no surprise at all. And we talk about the social media influence and everything that was so good about the Derby and why everybody wanted to watch it. Having Sandman back in the Preakness would be a big deal. And if he's healthy enough to run and he's not on any medications that would prohibit him from running, it's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to run him in the Preakness Stakes if he's healthy enough and if he's not being medicated with anything that would keep him and prohibit him from being able to run back that quickly. If not, then we'll probably see him in the Belmont Stakes, and there'll be a nice ballyhoo for the Belmont at Saratoga. And look, I get it. Everybody wants to run at Saratoga because it is the spa, it's the Mecca, all that. I love Saratoga. We go up many, many years to visit Saratoga, even when it's non-racing season. I have nothing against Saratoga for sure, but I think the Preakness stands on its own, and I think it deserves a top-notch field each and every year. All right, let's move on from that topic, and we go to topic number 4 this week on the It's Official podcast. As for the Kentucky Oaks, we saw one Oaks winner move forward, an older Oaks winner move backward. Let's go back to last week at Churchill Downs for the Kentucky Oaks. Nobody had been able to take on and defeat the favorite for the Kentucky Oaks until the starting gate, and nobody could take her on and defeat her at the end as well. Let's go back to the Kentucky Oaks victory, as she's now 7 for 7 lifetime. Good cheer in the Oaks.
Simply Joking is at the rail. Good cheer. Now in 6th as they make their way into the far turn. She's still 5.5 lengths behind Lakara and Tenma, who take their battle into the far turn, a neck in front. It is Lakara in front. Tenma to the outside, second by 1.5 lengths. And then comes Anna's Promise in 3rd, followed on the outside by Quiet Side in 4th. And yet to get going is Good Cheer, but she's going to circle up on the far outside as they come to the top of the stretch. Lakara off the turn in front. Tenma trying to run with her. Good Cheer and Ballerina Doro comes roaring up on the outside. Good Cheer now. Good Cheer has taken the lead as they come into the final furlong and is opening up late to a 3-length lead as they come down to the wire. It is going to be Good Cheer, the undefeated filly, to win the Kentucky Oaks. Drexel Hill came on late for second. Bless the Broken was third, and Tenma finished fourth. The final time was 1 minute 50.15 seconds. Good Cheer is perfect.
Big weekend for Godolphin, owning the Oaks and Derby winners. You saw those royal blue silks of Sheikh Mohammed, the ruler of Dubai. Good Cheer, now 7 for 7 lifetime. Luis Saez with the winning ride. And what about the sire Medaglia d'Oro? What a career he has had at stud with the fillies, particularly the 3-year-old fillies. Now a 3-time sire of a Kentucky Oaks winner. Medaglia d'Oro sired Plum Pretty. He also sired Rachel Alexandra, the great one. And now Good Cheer. How great can she be? We're going to find out. She's 7 for 7 lifetime. She still hasn't gotten a buyer speed figure that anybody who cares about the numbers is going to be excited about. The moderate 90s here again. The reason why maybe or maybe not that people didn't go into the Kentucky Oaks thinking that she was an all-time type was those speed figures. But she's outrunning everything. She's outrunning all the competition. She's outrunning the skeptics. And she just keeps on keeping on. She's never seen a photo finish. She's never been within 2.5 lengths of her at the wire. She got to 1.5 lengths, I believe, or the final margin here in the Oaks. Again, she just never warmed up in a race to this point. She keeps knocking down whoever they put in front of her. Maybe when she takes on older fillies and mares later in the year, the Good Cheer will be in a little bit of higher and tougher competition and deeper waters to take on. Because last year we saw with Torpedo Anna, she got all the way through the season unscathed against the fillies and mares, including the Breeders' Cup Distaff at the end of the year. But as we talked about, one Oaks winner moving forward and one moving back. The one moving back is the aforementioned Torpedo Anna. She returned to Churchill Downs on just 3 weeks rest after winning the Apple Blossom. She ran in the Azeri earlier this season at Oaklawn as well. And frankly, the wheels came off for her in the La Troyenne Stakes. Let's go back to watch Raging Sea win the La Troyenne, and a floundering and confounding performance from Torpedo Anna.
Has opened up a bit. Randomized leads by 2 off the turn. Darth Vader has come through toward the rail. Torpedo Anna starts to give way. Here's Text. Here's Raging Sea. And here's the final furlong. It's randomized in front. Text runs at her. Raging Sea splits horses. Here's Raging Sea up for the lead. Text into second. Not today for Torpedo Anna. They're coming to the finish. And Raging Sea.
Now, as good as her campaign was last year, Torpedo Anna, this year, you can question it. I think it's fair to do so. Not sure why she ran in the Azeri to prep towards a mile and a 16th Apple Blossom. The Apple Blossom seemed like a race that she could have come back in without a prep race. If she was going to come back in the Azeri and run in the La Troyenne because they wanted to run against in front of a big crowd on Kentucky Oaks Day, then they should have skipped the race 3 weeks ago in the Apple Blossom. This seems like they tried to do a little bit too much with her. And when she didn't run some of her better races, the few times the Cotillion, really, the one that was on the quick turnaround last year after running in the Travers against the boys in August, coming right back in September and running in the Cotillion at Parks. She almost got beat that day. I think they've learned the lesson. You don't want to run her back too quickly. Some horses do better with time, some don't, And while we talk about the obligation of running in the Triple Crown and what that means to the industry, there's no obligation with a 4-year-old to run back quicker than she has to. You've got all season to get to the Breeders' Cup. There's only one fixed date on the calendar when you have a 4-year-old filly. That's the Breeders' Cup distaff, and the rest of them, you kind of get there the way that you can get there best. Kenny McPeak took some of the blame afterwards, saying he probably overran her. They sent her to Rudin Riddle Clinic in Lexington after this race in the La Troyenne. They say they got a clean bill of health there, so there's nothing physically wrong with her. She's just tuckered out. So maybe we'll see Torpedo Anna get back to her best racing level, but she hasn't been dominant and overly impressive in her 3 starts so far this year, and they each seem to go a little bit further south. We'll see if she can get her form back. So while we have one Oaks winner on the uprise in Good Cheer, last year's Oaks winner's kind of gone the other direction with Torpedo Anna. Let's see how she ends up by season's end. She wasn't just the only superstar on the undercards last week, though, at Churchill Downs. What a great set of races we had in the preliminaries on Oaks and Derby days. Typically, the last topic on this podcast each and every week is our stars of tomorrow. We're usually taking a maiden winner who you want to watch for somewhere down the road. There were too many big superstars to not talk about this week to get into the maiden ranks. So let's talk about some of the stars of the undercard. On Friday, on Kentucky Oaks Day, in the Modesty Stakes, the top filly on the grass in America, she just might be She Feels Pretty. Another big-time performance as she made her seasonal debut for Cherie DeVoe.
But it was a brief lead. Here She Feels Pretty, who rolls off the turn and takes charge, top of the stretch, and now she's set down for the drive. Saffron Moon to the attack in second with a furlong to go. Give me another, rallying down the center of the course. She Feels Pretty kicks away. She dashes away by 3. Saffron Moon, and give me another. She Feels Pretty, and She
Feels Pretty has now won 6 of 9. Her 3 losses for about 2 combined lengths. I mean, she just fires every time. She took on older horses for the first time and did so impressively in the Modesty. Another one on the Friday card last week. What about the Ali Sheba Stakes? It was supposed to be a showdown between Locked and Fierceness. Todd Pletcher stablemates. Locked didn't fire, but Fierceness, he came back with his fangs showing.
Is last at the quarter pole. They're off the turn. Most Wanted drifts out to confront Fierceness, but Fierceness has come on to take the lead. It's Fierceness in front. Most Wanted's gonna fight Fierceness to the final 16th. Fierceness digs in. Most Wanted continues to battle, but Fierceness is getting away late, and Fierceness is back in style.
Talk about a horse in Fierceness who, going into the Kentucky Derby last year and out of the Derby, the talk was if he doesn't get his own way, he's a completely different horse. He seems to have matured. He ran a good second from not in a, easygoing lead in the Breeders' Cup Classic last year. He came from just a little bit off of it and was able to stalk and run a big race. Only got outrun by Sierra Leone late there. His comeback race here in a mile and a 16th shouldn't have been as sharp as distance, was able to sit and go buy a good horse in Most Wanted. They beat Hall of Fame. They beat Locke. This was an excellent field in the Ali Sheba. This really sets Fierceness up for an interesting year. He could be back on Belmont Stakes Day in the Met Mile, in a one-turn mile. A very interesting race the Met Mile is shaking out to be. But Fierceness back. Last year's defeated favorite in the Kentucky Derby. He looks like he's kind of learned some lessons and gotten to become a more professional racehorse. Looking forward to seeing what he might be able to do the rest of the campaign. Now, as for some Saturday undercard races, let's go to Copian. She won the Derby City Distaff coming in from Southern California. The Californians had a really big day. Of course, they ran 2-3 in the Kentucky Derby, but they had some big wins on the undercards as well. None bigger probably than Copian. She was as impressive as anybody. The Derby City Distaff for trainer Richard Mandela, he was turning back the clock with this one.
Is in 7th as they come to the top of the stretch, where Hope Road comes wide off the turn, but grabs a 2-length lead at the top of the stretch. Copian runs up into 2nd, Ways and Means in behind in 3rd. 1 furlong to go. Hope Road fully extended on the lead. Copian trying to push on by. Here's Copian, who's up for the lead right at the 16th pole, and Copian kicks away. Copian splashes home the 3-length win.
Runner-up in there, also the West Coaster, Hope rode for Baffert. So the West Coast in the filly and mare sprint division, they took on the beasts of the East. I mean, Ways and Means, Vava in that race, Positano Sunset coming off a win in the Madison. And it was the two West Coasters running 1-2 on an off track. And, as mentioned by Michael McCarthy, John Sheriffs in the post-race interviews for the Kentucky Derby, the California horses do not get much experience at all on an off track. A lot of cancellations, a lot of training canceled when the track comes up wet at Santa Anita. So it's a situation that they're not as accustomed to, but they certainly took to it like ducks to water over the course of the weekend. And then finally, we're going to wrap things up with the Churchill Downs Stakes, the race named after the racetrack. But I'll tell you what, this was as good a finish as you are going to see in a horse race, because all the big horses in this race came with their A game, 4 or 5 of them with the shot all the way to the wire. At the end of 7/8 of a mile, it was Mindfray.
The far outside, and Bookham Dano trying to find a way through two. They're off the turn. Mulligan has the lead heading for the 8th pole. Bookham Dano splits rivals. Nisos fights on. Mindframe is there. Tejano twist down the center of the track. It's wide open. 100 yards to go. Bookham Dano comes on through short lead. Here comes Mindframe. Mindframe and Nisos, and down inside Banishing. Wild finish. Photo.
Earlier this year, we thought that the Saudi Cup was going to be a race that may not be replaced as the race of the year. Remember Romantic Warrior going head-to-head with Forever Young in an immaculate stretch duel between the King of Hong Kong, the King of Japan, in that race that was just, such a thriller. Said maybe in February there won't be a better race run all year. Churchill Downs Handicap is now in that mix. Those were 5 serious, legitimate horses, all on the wire, all who came with their A game. If we take that 7/8 of a mile race, the Churchill Downs Stakes, and then we look at the Ali Sheba and a mile and a 16th with Fierceness, Most Wanted and Company, imagine when you get those two groups together around the mile. The Met Mile could be absolutely something on Belmont Stakes Day. Must see. It's not exactly one turn at Saratoga for the mile. Of course, they start there from the Wilson chute, kind of a dog leg left out of the first turn, kind of a turn and a half, if you will. So maybe that's kind of like the middle ground we all need to see in the Met Mile between these routers and sprinters that were so good in the Churchill Downs Stakes and so good in the Ali Sheba. And then, of course, you bring in any other new runners to the mix, and it could be a fabulous edition of the Met Mile. Let's review our topics this week on It's Official as we review Kentucky Derby week. We started things off with a Kentucky Derby that made sense. It was the top prep races. It was a pace setup everybody saw, and it was 2 of the top 3 wagering choices completing the exacta. We also made a lot of cents and dollars in the Kentucky Derby this year from a handle standpoint. Records set in the Kentucky Derby race, Kentucky Derby day, and Kentucky Derby week pools at Churchill Downs, with a TV audience the largest since 1989. More than 17 million people watched this year's Kentucky Derby. Sovereignty's Preakness. We talked about not only Sovereignty skipping the Preakness Stakes in recent years, but some others, including horses who don't win the Kentucky Derby. What can we do about it? What can we get in terms of answers? That's the topic that has to be addressed here in the coming years as we get towards a Triple Crown that's getting harder and harder to keep a group together to compete in. One Oaks winner went forward. One Oaks winner went back. The new Oaks winner, of course, the undefeated filly who went on to win once again in the Kentucky Oaks this year. That was a Good Cheer. Good Cheer had a tremendous performance in this year's Oaks. She's now 7 for 7 lifetime, but it was not a top shelf effort from last year's Oaks winner when she came back, that being Torpedo Anna. And our stars of the undercards this week, we looked at the Modesty Stakes, She Feels Pretty, the Ali Sheba win by Fierceness, the Derby City Distaff by the West Coaster Copian, and the Churchill Downs Stakes, one of the races of the year, won by Mindframe. Those 5 topics are now official because Jeff Siegel and I say so. That's how we play the game here on the podcast. Hope to have Jeff back sometime soon here in the desk as we take on 5 hot topics each and every week. Hope you enjoyed the commentary on Kentucky Derby 151 and look forward to Preakness number 150 coming up a week from Saturday. When we reconvene this week, Scott Shapiro and I on Friday will handicap some weekend stakes races for you. When we get back together next Tuesday for the It's Official podcast, we'll know the complete lineups for Black Eyed Susan Day on Friday and Preakness 150 Day on Saturday. Those will be drawn Sunday and Monday, respectively, just outside Baltimore. On behalf of everybody with First Bet and Express Bet, I'm Jeremy Plonk. Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.